Sisters, brothers, and siblings, once again on so-called Thanksgiving Day, United American Indians of New England and our supporters are gathered on this hill to observe a National Day of Mourning for the indigenous people murdered by settler colonialism and imperialism worldwide. Today marks the 53rd time we have gathered here to mourn our ancestors, tear down settler mythologies, and speak truth to power. Today, I want to tell you a story, the story of National Day of Mourning. 52 Thanksgivings ago, my grandfather, an Aquinnah-Wampanoag man named Wamsutta Frank James, was invited by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to speak at a banquet celebrating the 350th anniversary of the arrival of the Pilgrims. The organizers of the banquet no doubt imagined that Wamsutta would sing the praises of the American settler colonial project and thank the Pilgrims for bringing civilization to these shores. However, the speech that Wamsutta wrote, which was based on historical fact rather than the sham version of history perpetuated in the Thanksgiving myth, was a far cry from complimentary. In his speech, Wamsutta not only named atrocities committed by the Pilgrims, but also reflected upon the fate of the Wampanoag at the hands of the settler invaders. The speech contained a powerful message of Native American pride. "Our spirit refuses to die," wrote Wamsutta. "Yesterday, we walked the woodland paths and sandy trails. Today, we must walk the macadam highways and roads. We are uniting. We stand tall and proud, and before too many moons pass, we'll right the wrongs we have allowed to happen to us." So, why do so many Native people object to the Thanksgiving myth? According to this myth, the Pilgrims, seeking religious freedom, landed on Plymouth Rock. The Indians welcomed them with open arms and then conveniently faded into the background, and everyone lived happily ever after. The end. Here is the truth. First, the Pilgrims are glorified and mythologized because the circumstances of the first permanent English colony in North America, Jamestown, were too ugly to hold up as an effective national myth. Pilgrims and Indians are a much more marketable story than settler cannibalism. Second, the Pilgrims came here as part of a commercial venture. They didn't need religious freedom. They already had that back in the Netherlands. The Mayflower Compact was merely a group of white men who wanted to ensure they would get a return on their investment. Third, when the Pilgrims arrived, on Outer Cape Cod, by the way, not on that pebble down the hill, one of the first things they did was to rob Wampanoag graves at Corn Hill and steal as much of their winter provisions of corn and beans as they were able to carry. Fourth, some Wampanoag ancestors did welcome the Pilgrims and save them from starvation. And what did we, the indigenous people of this continent, get in return for this kindness? Genocide, the theft of our lands, the destruction of our traditional ways of life, slavery, starvation, and never-ending oppression. Fifth, the first official Thanksgiving did not take place in 1621, when the Pilgrims had a harvest time meal provided largely by the Wampanoag. Instead, the first Thanksgiving was declared in 1637 by Governor Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to celebrate the massacre of over 700 Pequot men, women, and children on the banks of the Mystic River in Connecticut. William Bradford of the Plymouth Colony wrote of this event, "Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword. Some hewed to pieces. They thus destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire. Horrible was the stink and scent thereof, but the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them." Subsequent slaughters of indigenous people would be celebrated as a day of Thanksgiving, and yet we are labeled as savages in the history books. So why does any of this matter? It is simple. When people celebrate the myth of Thanksgiving, they are not only erasing our genocide, but also celebrating it. We did not simply fade into the background, as the Thanksgiving myth says. We have survived and flourished. We have persevered. The very fact that you are here is proof that we did not vanish. Our very presence frees this land from the lies of the history books and the myth makers. We will remember and honor all our ancestors in the struggle who went before us. We will speak truth to power, as we have been doing since the first day of mourning in 1970. That first day of mourning in 1970 was a powerful demonstration of Native unity, and it has continued for all these years as a powerful demonstration of Indigenous unity and of the unity of all people who speak truth to power. We all know that racism is alive and well. All of us are struggling under the oppression of a capitalist system which forces people to make a bitter choice between heating and eating. And we will continue to gather on this hill until we are free from the oppressive system, until corporations and the US military stop polluting the earth, until we dismantle the brutal apparatus of mass incarceration. We will not stop until the oppression of our LGBTQ siblings is a thing of the past, until unhoused people have homes, until human beings are no longer locked in cages at the US border, despite the fact that no one is illegal on stolen land. Until Palestine is free. Until no person goes hungry or is left to die because they have little or no access to quality health care. Until insulin is free. Until union busting is a thing of the past. Until then, the struggle will continue. In 1970, we demanded an end to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It is still a demand today. Native nations do not need federal oversight to govern ourselves or take care of our own lands. As we did in 1970, we mourn the loss of millions of our ancestors and the devastation of the land, water, and air. We condemn all acts of violence and terrorism perpetrated by all governments against innocent people worldwide. This includes the myriad crimes of the United States government. Since the invasion of Columbus, Indigenous people have been terrorized by settler governments. From the colonial period to the 21st century, this has entailed torture, massacres, systematic military occupations, and the forced removals of Indigenous peoples from their ancestral homelands. Let us not forget that this country was founded on the ideology of white supremacy, the widespread practice of African slavery, and a policy of genocide and land theft. Let us not forget that under the pipelines, skyscrapers, mines, and the oil rigs lie the interred bones, sacred objects, and villages of our Native ancestors. Today, on liberated territory, we will correct the history of a country that continues to glorify murderers, such as Christopher Columbus, that makes slave-owning presidents, such as Washington and Jefferson, into godlike figures, and even carves their faces into the sacred Black Hills of the Lakota. In 1970, very few people would have given any thought to the fact that the Indigenous people of this hemisphere do not look upon the arrival of the European invaders as a reason to give thanks. Today, many thousands stand with us in spirit as we commemorate the 2022 National Day of Mourning. As my grandfather said back in 1970, we are now being heard. We are now being listened to. The important point is that we still have the spirit, we still have the unique culture, we still have the will, and, most important of all, the determination to remain as Indians. We are determined, and our presence here is living testimony that this is only the beginning of the American Indian, particularly the Wampanoag, to regain the position in this country that is rightfully ours. In the spirit of Crazy Horse, in the spirit of Metacom, in the spirit of Geronimo, above all, to all people who fight and struggle for real justice, we are not vanishing, we are not conquered, we are as strong as ever.
We have a lot of positive things happening in our communities, but this Thanksgiving Day is a day of mourning. We start out by acknowledging that a lot of people today are feeling pain from the violence that their communities are experiencing. In particular, we embrace and are part of the LGBTQ plus two-spirit and trans communities that are so under attack and are grieving the loss of family right now at Club Q in Colorado. As usual, we have a lot of things to talk about at National Day of Mourning. Some of our speakers today are Indigenous people whose nations are on the front lines of the climate crisis, as are Indigenous peoples in multiple continents, suffering from floods, extreme heat, melting, the impact on animals and fish and plants. Land bases are disappearing and traditional cultural practices are being devastated by this. Despite this happening, climate conferences such as COP27 continue to have way too much useless talk without the necessary commitment and immediate action required to properly address what is happening, and they continue to largely exclude Indigenous people and voices. Everywhere, Indigenous peoples are resisting megadams, lithium mines, copper mines, coal mines, gold mines, oil and gas pipelines, fracking, and so many other destructive projects. Many Native communities do not have safe drinking water, often due to industrial and military pollution, such as what has happened in Hawaii because of the US Navy. So we say today, hands off our land and water. Stop destroying our planet. Right now, many of us Native people in this country, really all of us, are closely watching the attacks on the Indian Child Welfare Act, also referred to as ICWA, which is intended to protect Indigenous children from being removed from their communities. The Supreme Court ICWA appeal is backed by energy companies and evangelicals. They are viciously attacking Indigenous sovereignty, our nations, and our families in an effort to steal yet more Indigenous land and return to the days when about a third of Indigenous children were being taken away from their homes and tribal communities to be adopted into non-Native families. Along with concerns about ICWA is the blunt fact that Native children are at least 4 times more likely to be in foster care, with those numbers even much higher in some areas. We continue to join with those demanding the identification and return of the remains of thousands of Indigenous children who died at the residential schools and boarding schools, so-called schools. Schools shouldn't have graveyards. Sponsored by Canada and the United States in order to kill the Indian and the child and destroy Indigenous communities. So we say today, hands off our children. We acknowledge that the current widespread attacks on reproductive rights affect all potential child bearers. We also point out that a reproductive rights crisis has existed for decades for Indigenous women, long before the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That crisis includes a lack of support to be able to bear and bring up children with decent food and housing and without having them stolen by settler agencies. It includes the need for free and safe abortion, and we cannot forget the former government practice of sterilizing Indigenous women and girls without consent, something that is still known to happen in Canada and that has happened in other countries as well. That is genocide. We point out that violence against Indigenous women, girls, trans and two-spirit people is rampant, the very highest rates. Our relatives continue to be stolen from us and killed, including right here in Massachusetts. So we say today, hands and laws off our bodies. Museums and other institutions around the country, from Harvard to Berkeley, continue to hold onto our ancestors, by which I mean skeletal remains, skulls, hair, funerary items, and more. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, needs to be strengthened, and all of our ancestors returned now. We cannot rest until that happens. So we say today, hands off our ancestors. Year after year, we stand on this hill and demand an end to the colonial borders. We demand that ICE be abolished and that Customs and Border Patrol stop detaining undocumented migrants. We think not only of the tribal nations whose homelands have been divided by the arbitrary settler colonial border, but also of the many thousands of indigenous and other people impacted by U.S. policies that have led them to flee their home countries, and of the Haitian and other relatives who are denied entry or deported by border control. So we say, hands off our relatives. There are many important struggles happening right now that we won't have time to touch upon today. So I'm going to ask you to spend some time after today following United American Indians of New England and other indigenous-led organizations on social media, and also start reading indigenous media, because you're not going to learn anything from white reporters at the New York Times. I say that because it's 2022 and the New York Times still does not have a single Native reporter on its staff. But we want you to learn more about indigenous movements here and internationally, and what you can do to support them. So please try to educate yourself further after today. We really do a lot of education, all of our organizations, so please take advantage of that. You know, everywhere there are calls for land back and reparations, our ancestors always taught us to demand the return of our lands. It is not a new idea. The land and water are in our blood and bones, part of our bodies, and we have never forgotten that. So ensuring that indigenous peoples around the world can manage the land and water is documented to be much better for the earth. As part of urgently needed first steps, not last steps, but first steps to achieve justice and address climate change, let's ensure that no projects can go through any indigenous nation's land without free, prior, and authentic informed consent. It's time to cancel the leases, the pipelines, the mining, and the corporate contracts and start over. Take all of the land that is currently being mismanaged by settler governments, such as the national parks, and hand it over to indigenous nations to caretake that land. That would mean the restoration of millions of acres. It would also mean the end of the desecration of sacred sites, such as the Black Hills. Land back needs to happen internationally. Okay, let's move on with our program. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Beautiful day. The Creator is blessing us with a beautiful day, especially in this sacred land of the Wampanoag. What we have to share today is quite simple because for hundreds of years we've been fighting, struggling, and things just got worse. The right-wing racist or groups in this planet are very busy working in this continent. Not only with the coming of Columbus and the Pilgrims, but today they are coming to our countries, sponsoring, recruiting people, especially the young, to indoctrinate them, to brainwash them with their ideologies. And it's working for them because they come with all the resources, money, to sponsor these programs and to put these young people in positions of power in local governments and all levels of government. So this problem is real. And you too have this problem in this country. And you have to take it very seriously. Because if this country goes radical, racist, white supremacist, the whole planet is going to suffer even more. If you know the history of our countries, how your banana companies and all these transnationals have come and destroy us and steal our resources. Well, let me tell you something. If these guys here with you take power, they really gonna go and kill us all. This is really, really serious. This is not a joke. So you need to get really well organized. And it's possible. Look, our communities in Chiapas, if you can declare yourselves autonomous and cut off all the links with the federal, whatever government, and start from scratch, is possible. It's possible. It is painful, it's hard work, but it's possible. And the proof is there. I'm not asking you to come to our communities in Chiapas, but it's there. Some of you that probably have been there, maybe experience that firsthand, saw it with your own eyes. It's possible. Making a better planet is possible. Don't give up on that. In Guatemala, the younger generations are doing unbelievable things with the language, with the culture, with arts. Arts is a powerful weapon. The younger generations today, longer hair, just the practicing their ancestral cultures more and more and more, cutting from all these Christian organizations that we have there. So I just want to thank you for you that came here today, which shows that you care. You care, and we must care for each other and from our Mother Earth for this creation. And let's have it very clear. These are dangerous times. This is nothing funny. But you know what? Stop watching and going to watch all those war movies, because we've been brainwashed through history, you know, with all those movies. Okay, we used to get to violence, to war, you know, it's okay, you know. You have the superheroes. Where are the superheroes? So Stop giving your money to these companies. You know, everyone complains about Amazons, but what? We are still buying from them, you know? Come on. We need to have the courage to stop cutting and making weak all these horrible monster corporations that are destroying us. I mean, come on, you know that. Support your local businesses, you know, create small cooperatives. Everything is possible, you know. So again, thank you so much for being here. Believe me, it's possible. Zapata vive, la lucha sigue. Zapata vive, la lucha sigue. Zapata vive, la lucha sigue, sigue, sigue. Mateusz.